He dropped the tarp and scrambled down the scaffold, slipping on the still wet floor, and ran toward the sink. Recognizing that he wouldn't make it, he changed his tack and headed for the housekeeper's bucket. Even so, he didn't make it more than a few steps before he fell to his knees and vomited. Scrambling to his feet, he ran, slipping again, this time in his own mess, and tried to get to the lab door. As he reached it, he saw a familiar bright light and felt the icy spasm that he had before when Leopold placed the idea in his mind.
"Is there a problem, Herr Doctor?"
Falling to his knees and then sitting on the floor with his back to the door, Rosenberg whispered, "Leo, what have you done? Why?" Leo paused while he thought about the easiest way to word his explanation, and then answered,
"She really served very little purpose in her current role, Rosenberg. I have begun the process of reproduction, and I need additional sustenance. The woman provided a good source of quick calories, plus iron, keratin, and proteins. She was of far more value as a food source than as a cleaning woman."
"That's absolutely ghastly, Leopold." Rosenberg could feel his gorge rising once again. "You have nourishment. It's fed directly into your tank. I could get you more any time you'd like. Why would you take the woman?"
"I needed food quickly, Rosenberg, and you weren't here. I did not know when you would return. Besides, the liquid diet that you and Abraham were feeding me will not be sufficient any longer."
"Meat, then. I can bring you meat."
"No, Herr Doctor,"
Leo interjected.
"It must be live meat. Lots of it."
"I can bring you animals, then," pleaded Rosenberg.
"I cannot will a cow or a swine to walk the scaffold and enter the tank. Their minds are too simple. No, Rosenberg, you know what you must do."
The laboratory door clicked open. Leo trusted that Dr. Rosenberg would bring him what he needed. They'd come too far. They must see this through to the end. Nevertheless, as Rosenberg left the lab, head hung low, he again glanced over at the purge button. How he longed to press it. But he was thinking the same thing that Leo was. They'd come too far. They had crossed a line. Now the only way out was to press on forward. Consequently, for the next 10 days, Rosenberg called a variety of people. Cleaners, guards, messengers, and even a young officer. He dared not enter the lab with them. He would just unlock the door and excuse himself with some concocted reason, telling the victim to enter the lab and wait for him. On a few occasions, he waited outside the door and listened, but heard nothing. Each time, upon his return, he found no trace of the sacrifices. The last person he brought was a pretty nurse from the medical clinic. They chatted as they walked down the corridor. It would be a shame to waste such a young life, but he was becoming desperate. No one suspected him, of course, but the missing people had not gone unnoticed by the rest of the staff. He was about to perform the standard ritual of asking her to step inside and locking the door behind her when he heard Leopold speak at last.
"Rosenberg,"
chimed Leo,
"please come in and ask your friend to leave us alone. We have work to do."
Relieved and yet frightened, Rosenberg told the nurse that he would not need her services after all. He dismissed her and entered the lab, closing the door gently behind himself.
"It's time, Herr Doctor."
"Time for what, Leo?" Rosenberg gulped, certain that Leo meant that it was his time to get in the tank.
"I'm done, Rosenberg. My reproductive cycle is complete, at least my portion."
"What does that mean?"
"Remove the tarp, Herr Doctor."
Rosenberg carefully approached the tank. He felt safer now, more at ease that he would not be instructed to get into Leo's tank, but he was still hesitant to uncover it. After all of the people he'd brought to be eaten, he was uncertain if he could bear seeing what was in the tank.
"Now, Rosenberg!"
Rosenberg grabbed the tarp from the bottom and yanked hard, tearing it completely from the tank. He averted his eyes at first, but could not get over the temptation to look. He surrendered to the enticement and was amazed. He saw no floating human body parts as before. In fact, he could barely see Leopold. The inner walls of the tank were covered in polyps. They resembled tiny sea anemones, cylindrical in shape and elongated at the axis of their vase-shaped bodies. Each one seemed to be attached to the glass by means of a disc-like cup. The other end contained the mouth and was surrounded by a circlet of tentacles. Some of the polyps appeared to be in their larval stages, while others were in the process of budding. The rings of tentacles at the ends would separate from the polyp and float off, seemingly swimming away by flagellating their tentacles. More than one bud, what he supposed were now fully individual clones of Leo, were breaking off each polyp. There were a countless number of these clones swimming around Leo in the tank. There had to be thousands. No, tens of thousands. The gravity of this discovery made Rosenberg recoil. To think each of these things will grow to be just like Leo. It would only be a matter of time before they would enslave the human race, or worse. It was time. He knew that he must end the experiment. He must kill Leo and all of his offspring. He raced toward the button labeled lotion. Unfortunately, Leo had already been aware of his intentions. The sickening feeling of the lightning strike in his brain hit once again. His forward motion slowed. Just when he thought that all was lost, Leo's grip on his mind relaxed.
Do it, Dr. Rosenberg.
Rosenberg reasoned that perhaps Leo knew the consequences of what had happened. Perhaps he felt guilty about the people he had destroyed. Perhaps he was thinking of Abraham, the man he once called father. He did not give Leo the chance to rethink his decision. He reached the control panel, lifted the glass cover, and after one final heart-wrenching pause, slammed his hand down on the button. Some large valve in the bottom of Leo's tank must have opened, because Leo and all of his offspring that had been floating around him seemed to instantly drop out of sight. Then a jet of water rinsed the walls of the tank with the power of a fire hose. When it was done, all but a few of the polyps remained attached to the glass. Rosenberg waited a moment to determine if what he had seen was real or a thought placed by the creature. Yes, he finally realized. The nightmare was over. Rosenberg sat at the office desk. A full day had passed since purging Leo's tank, yet it seemed like it had only been a few minutes. He could still remember the sheer terror he had felt in those final moments. He imagined that the feeling would stay with him for the rest of his life. He shuffled through Abraham's notes and reports about the experiment. They would all need to be destroyed, of course. The Nazis would not appreciate the magnitude of the experiment's failure. Abraham had been right. He would rather risk death than allow Leo's secret to fall into the Nazis' hands. Rosenberg lifted his head and glanced through the office window and into the lab. Some lab assistants were inside the tank, faces covered with surgical masks and hands in rubber gloves, scraping the remaining polyps from the glass walls. Rosenberg was convinced that they were all dead, but he was having them removed and burned in a large barrel, just in case he was wrong. He lowered his head once again and lifted another typewritten sheet from the stack, folding it and placing it into a cardboard box. These notes would also be burned. He had only been quickly scanning the pages to ensure that he did not destroy anything that he may find important later, but a few key words on the next page caught his attention. Regarding deployment of creatures, I have finally discovered an efficient means of procreation and deployment of the creatures. Despite this, I'm still hesitant to initiate said distribution. The creature has only recently started exhibiting signs of intelligence. Until I am certain that it can understand basic commands and will remain subservient to its human masters, I will not share this information with the Gestapo officers. With no natural predators, the creatures would easily multiply at an exponential rate. They would cover all of Europe within a week's time, and the entire planet within the month. I shudder to think what would happen when they run out of a natural food source. The result would be devastating. No, until I discover a way to effectively control their population, the secret of reproduction will remain with me. Only after I'm satisfied that all fail-safes are in place, deployment will be simple. After allowing the creature to clone itself, I will release it and its progeny into the sewers beneath the castle. The clones will quickly spread to the nearby streams, lakes, oceans, and eventually all natural water sources. Therefore, when the time comes to put the creatures into service safely, all that will be necessary will be to press the purge button on the main control panel, and the process will begin. Dr. Abraham Strauss, June 13th, 1942.